Welcome to Wabi-sabi Podcast. This is Adam Yasmin. This episode marks the 2-year anniversary of starting the show. So I'm super excited to share that with my listeners. If it's your first time, welcome. And if you are a return listener, welcome back. Hope you and your families and friends are staying safe in this pandemic, remaining vigilant, increasing resilience. I know I've been talking at length during these intros to share my recent certification and voyage into coaching in regards to digital wellness and helping us establish resilient boundaries with our daily tech usage. So I'll just leave that there. I'm really excited to share this week's guest, Dr. Alex Dainis. She is a science communicator who holds a PhD in genetics. And she really has found a way to utilize video and content creation to make science accessible and engaging to a huge audience. I first stumbled on her work through Instagram, explaining in simple and eloquent detail the ingredient list of the Pfizer COVID vaccine. That video alone inspired me to reach out to her and engage in this conversation. She has a lot of other incredible videos, including explaining the difference between RNA and DNA. So please be sure to check her out on Instagram, as well as on TikTok and on YouTube. I'll definitely share those links in the show notes. So without further ado, here's Dr. Dainis. Dr. Alex Dainis, welcome to the program. How are you doing?
Hello. I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here, and happy February, which is hard to imagine.
It is crazy. But we're here.
We are. So what are you drinking, if anything?
Yes. So I have not as fancy of a tea as I was drinking the last time I spoke with you, but I have a Harney and Sons Chinese flower tea. So it's a green tea.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's blended with green tea blended with marigold petals, cornflower, and I believe rose petals, or maybe hibiscus. Something.
So it's a green tea blend with other herbs.
Yes.
So it's not a flowering tea, because you may be familiar with flowering teas. Okay.
Yeah,
Beautiful.
no, it came in a sachet. I was delighted that so many people in my life know me so well that for Christmas, my parents gave me tea, my boyfriend gave me tea, and my boyfriend's parents gave me tea. And so I have a delightful selection that I'm working through at the moment, but this is one of my favorites.
I will gladly be a part of that continuum, and after this conversation, would love to send you some wild pu'er as well. Ooh. Just to round out the collection.
Is that what you are drinking?
I am going to be drinking pu'er because I had a really nice breakfast before this conversation, and because pu'er, I guess for us gringos here in the West, pu'er is touted for its health benefits. One of its purported health benefits is that it's an ideal digestive. Again, purported benefits because of its community of fungal and bacterial units. You know, it's really good for lower digestion, helps break down greasy foods. Having never been personally to mainland China, I have heard that in Fujian province in southeast China, it is what's served in dim sum houses.
Oh,
So
okay.
again, greasy, noodly. Um, so yeah, last time I spoke to you, which was on Instagram, which was delightful, I was drinking, I believe it was a ripe puer. I think it was
Yes.
waffles from White 2T. And what the hell am I drinking today? Today I'm drinking a raw puer from Y2T called Hype. And
Ooh.
unfortunately, I don't have the label with me for just really hyper minimalist, but I do have a bit of the cake left, which looks like
Oh,
this.
wow.
I find that
Oh, cool.
there's so many ways to look at and appreciate these objects. These, I mean, I can imagine. This is a really strange segue, but I can imagine a universe in which we are now in this stage of economic uncertainty and pandemic. The fact that we are so interested in cryptocurrencies, I'm surprised there isn't a finite T based currency.
That is interesting. I mean, I think one of the things that was so interesting to me when I was growing up and I learned about like what is money
Mm.
was the fact that, first of all, of course, I assumed that, well, the bank just has a giant stack of cash in the back and that's how banks work. And so understanding that a lot of it was sort of digital was interesting. But I do think that, you know, currencies that are based on something are fascinating. And so currencies based on gold or, materials like that are pretty common, but there's no reason other than just the fact that it's not common practice that it couldn't be based on something else of value like
Mhm.
tea. Because I know that some of those tea cakes go for hundreds of dollars, if not thousands, maybe,
Tens of
especially for the like,
thousands. Yeah.
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I mean, I hope we do not reach the, dystopia where we're all trading in the future, with whatever valuable items we have. But I could imagine someone with a big tea collection would be in a powerful position because, as we talked about last time, actually, every culture has some sort of tea ceremony, put some sort of value on tea that I feel like that's like a fascinating sci-fi premise of like a
So
world where
yeah,
tea is the currency.
we should draft a anthropological sci-fi sci-fi
Yes.
premise for a film.
Oh, I would love that.
Uh, um, so so like on Instagram, I discovered your work as a science communicator and content creator, focused on um, what you're putting out there, because now as a society we all have to suddenly become microbiologists overnight
Yeah.
and continue, it's like the fact that we are questioning our trust in science, or of just public speakers is definitely something, maybe, yeah, definitely something worth exploring in this conversation. But the fact that you created this content that delightfully explains the difference between DNA and RNA, I think I immediately was suggested a video of yours that was explaining, or breaking down the ingredient list of the Pfizer SARS-CoV-2 vaccine. And to come across that at the same time as getting this barrage, or being barraged by doubt, or by disinformation, is an amazing, strange sort of ocean that we're in. And I'd like to know, or like to get a little bit of background on sort of the story, or the sort of arc of pursuing your PhD in genetics, and then crafting this. Um, I don't want to assume, like, are you crafting a persona to be a communicator, to be a content creator, but what that sort of timeline was like, and how the fact that you're creating this content in real time getting, eyes and getting a level of engagement that people can immediately ask you for facts or for information to back up this or back up that, and yeah, I'll let you go from here.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk for 4 hours now.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, so I'll sort of start at the beginning, that I have always been interested in both science and film. So I did my undergraduate degree at Brandeis, close to Boston, and I did both a degree in film and a degree in biology. And I thought for a while that I would really have to choose between the two, that I would have to choose either being a filmmaker or being a scientist. But I loved both. And so I worked for a couple years at a small production company after undergrad, doing sort of museum media and some really cool stuff there. But I missed talking about science. So I started a YouTube channel to talk about science that was really just a side hobby and just something fun for me to babble about whatever thing I found interesting that week. But I did know that I wanted to go back into research. So I shifted gears. I went back to graduate school for genetics. And I chose genetics because I really feel like with genetics, you can ask and answer almost any question about biology that you want to. That there is a genetics core to so much of biology that if I could get a good foundation in that, that I could really explore whatever area of biology I wanted to. So I started grad school very idealistically with just like, I like biology and I like genetics, but it was, I don't want to say selfish, but it was just very much a, this is what I find to be cool. But I started grad school right around the time that CRISPR was starting to sort of hit the research community, which is a really revolutionary tool that we have to edit genes and to go in and just speed up genetics research to a speed that was not even considered possible 10, 15 years ago. And also at the same time that DNA sequencing was just becoming affordable. So I really sort of unknowingly started in the field at a time where these technologies were ramping up incredibly fast and starting to touch more people's everyday lives. I mean, of course, we all have DNA and we all eat food that has DNA in it because all your food has DNA in it. But I think it was really a turning point where we were able to do so much more clinically and research based that it was starting to just, more people were hearing about it and more people were learning about it. And so I sort of came back to the YouTube channel now as an outlet for my creative side, now that I was back in grad school, to be able to talk about the cool things that were going on in genetics and the cool things that I was seeing. But again, really a sort of a selfish creative outlet as a way for me to sort of have a little bit of fun on the side and talk about the things that I loved, because that's really what I love doing, is talking about science. And so through that, as I finished up my PhD, I actually started to get some freelance jobs doing science communication. I worked as an oral communication tutor at Stanford, really specializing in science. So trying to teach scientists better tools for communicating about their work, because I feel like it's exceptionally important and is more so now, but has always been important for scientists to be able to communicate their work that they're doing. Because if you can't talk about the work you're doing, you might as well have not done it. And that could mean to other scientists, right? It's very important that we go to science conferences and we talk to other scientists about what we're doing, but also to be able to communicate to, the friends that you're seeing at dinner or the people around you or society at large, what you're doing. So I really decided I didn't have to choose between science or film or communication, and tried to craft a career that was the merge of all three of these, where again, sort of selfishly, I get to do my favorite thing every single day, which is to talk about science and to communicate science, but also hopefully be a bridge between the scientific world and people who are hearing about these things but might not have a background in it. Both because I think it's important to empower people with the vocabulary of science so that they feel like they can engage in these conversations. And also because scientists are doing research. We can't also expect them to do research full time and be a full time communicator. So all of this was sort of where I was in 2019. And again, really sort of working both for myself on just projects I found to be interesting, but also working for companies who need some sort of outreach or education angle, but don't have the capacity to do that themselves. But then COVID hit, and I did not anticipate that I would talk about COVID or the vaccines as much as I ended up doing. But when COVID first became something that was impacting all of our lives, I made a video about the genetics behind it, because that's really the angle where I have expertise and felt like I could add something to the conversation about what is RNA, what is, what are the genetics of COVID-19. And I just got so many questions. And so I started talking about these things more and more, because just as you were saying, it was really a real time arena where I could say something and provide as much information as possible, but people had great questions. And I also had questions. And part of it was that people were asking me things. And part of it was just that, wow, there are these new vaccines called RNA vaccines that I'd heard, rumblings of a few years back when Ebola was a big problem. There were some Ebola and Zika trials that had started up, but I hadn't thought about this in years. And I was being inundated with sort of random snippets of information from all these places. And there wasn't really one great source of information that I was going to find out about these things. So as I was pulling all of this information together for myself, I figured, why not share it? So I started making YouTube videos and TikTok videos really about both questions that other people had, but also questions that I had. Because I figured if I had these questions and I was going searching and digging through the literature to find these answers, why not save everybody else the time of going and digging through the literature to find these answers and just share what I was learning, with the perspective that, I have a deep understanding of DNA and RNA. And so I thought I could provide an interesting perspective on specifically these RNA vaccines, because I spent a lot of time in grad school. My PhD was on RNA silencing and sequencing. So I spent way too much time thinking about RNA and how RNA works. So I hoped that I could sort of bring that information out and to more people. And I really have been overwhelmed by the feedback of both people who are thanking me for this information, but also people who are just asking more and more questions, which is great, because we're in such an uncertain and scary time that information makes me feel better. Information makes me feel less scared. And so, I spend too much time every day researching these things and looking at these things to make myself feel better and to make myself feel confident in how science is moving forward and what is happening. And so if I can share that with other people and help them feel a little bit more confident about how they're interacting with the world right now and what's going to be happening with these vaccines, I want to do all that I can to share that and to amplify areas of information that I am not an expert in, but I can share an expert opinion in. For example, I am not an expert in vaccine distribution. I am not the right person to go to on how we should be getting that to other people, but I can hopefully try and find great experts in that and amplify the information that they're sharing, again, because that makes me feel better and I want to spread that to more people.
That is, that's, I have to say, it's profound to, again, not only hear the sort of this unique timeline that you're describing, but to also be able to empathize, like to relate to elements of, oh, I also feel, I'm just going to use the word lightly, just anxiety when I'm in the pursuit of information. And then when I get information, I'm like, oh, there is there is a groundedness, there's a grounding feeling to that, there is an assurance, to not speak in absolutes, there is a place that you get to when you receive information, and then you can always, we're always going to be iterating upon that. And I find, just to just to take an opportunity to philosophize this for a moment, when we're in this time of not only receiving so much information, and so much of it is not information, enough of it is actually has malintent behind it. So on the one hand, we're receiving information at any moment from any direction all the time. And then there's when we are seeking out information, when we are seeking to consume bits of information given whatever micro units of time we allot throughout the day. If we're sitting at a red light, if we're standing in the supermarket in line, if we're, you know, those of us who take our phones into the bathroom, we're all we're all part of that scenario too. And you know, it's, to me it feels like, because I'm not a scientist, but I do pursue information, I guess, like anyone else would. Science seems to be this understated, imperfect system, which is by design. It's you again, what's the scientific method? You have a hypothesis, you test that hypothesis, you you share your findings, and then you iterate on that. And so there's a cycle. It's just like it's like an Ouroboros, right? It's this infinite cycle. And it's, again, if I want to apply metaphors on top of it, it's no different than the seasons or weather cycles or cycles of a year or whatnot. And that's by itself, I can look at that and think that's amazing. It's beautiful. Nothing is perfect. Nothing is absolute. And yet we are all dealing with this pandemic societal fracturing by a multitude of means. And it's like, by some measure, I'm trying to view what's happening from a position of what's the word? There's this interesting seesaw between, I'm trying not to panic, I'm just trying to be perplexed. I'm trying to stay in perplexed so that I'm continuing to observe and also seek information, get information packets, actually check in how I feel emotionally about those information packets, and then continue on as I go. Whereas people have, they've gotten this misinformation, have created a whole religion around this, this mythos, this modern day mythos of QAnon and whatnot, amongst other conspiracy theories. It seems like, by some measure, we are in this never-ending history repeating aspect of, here's how society is fractured, here's how empires fell, here's how, again, now I feel like I'm ranting, so forgive me, but
No,
there
no.
isn't really, it's not so much a question, it's more just like a waxing on this. And especially just from your background. It's just something we spoke about in our previous conversation regarding how science right now needs a lot of PR, or sort of updated modern day PR to be, we need like emergent storytellers from the position of academia and science to be able to speak to people on sort of not only everyday language that isn't rooted in academia, but also with the right amount of empathy and humor that we need in this pandemic steeped in uncertainty. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, you hit on a couple of points that I've been thinking about a lot recently. And one is the comment that I think over the past like 4 or 5 months that has stuck with me the most is that when I am making this content, one of the things about science is that we don't speak in absolutes, or we try our hardest not to, for exactly that iteration point, that we're always gathering new data. We're always, slightly tweaking our hypotheses and our theories. So when I present this data, I always try and do my best to say that, it is likely that, or most of the studies show that. And I got this comment that came back and was like, you're using words like likely and mostly. That's not the kind of science I learned. The science I learned had answers. And I was so struck by this that it's because you learned science wrong, because we teach science as this list of facts when we learn it in school. And that's just not what the process of science is. But it's still how the news cycle presents science as science is done and here's a new fact. And as if we were just creating a list of facts versus continuing to explore our world. And so I think that that's something that we should have been doing better for a long time now, is explaining this iterative process of science. And it's not that every day we're completely changing our mind and saying, it's a virus, no, it's a bacteria, no, it's a this. It's not that level of flip-flopping as it is we're constantly building to the information we have and updating what we know. And I think people are a little resistant to that because they just view science as a list of facts. And so, well, your facts were wrong before. And it's like, no, they weren't wrong. We're just updating them with more information. So I think we need to do a much better job of communicating the scientific process and how it works, and of being clear about the fact that typically people are not so engaged in this portion of the scientific process. Typically, scientists are working away in a lab and they're going through this process and they're having these discussions at conferences, not because they want to keep it hidden, but because typically people don't care. Like nobody cared in the broader news cycle about my PhD work. And that doesn't mean that I was unhappy to share it, but just nobody was going to listen. Whereas now everybody is listening in as the process happens. And scientists are not used to communicating it that way, and people are not used to receiving it that way. So I think that sort of brings me to the second point you wanted, or that you brought up here, that I wanted to hit on, which is empathy. That I think that is one of the biggest things that we need in science communication now. And there are a lot of people who are doing it well, but I think that some traditional science media has been focused on the tone of, haha, you're wrong. And so you're stupid. And I'm going to tell you why we're right and we're scientists and we're smart. And I personally have never been persuaded by someone who started off a conversation by saying, haha, you're stupid, you're wrong, and I'm right. So I don't know why we as scientists think we're going to persuade people that way. So I think that we need to be coming at these conversations from a place of empathy, from a place where people are anxious and people are scared. And yes, there are some people out there who I think are absolutely fear mongering and doing it for the wrong reasons. But I think a lot of people are looking for information and are getting bad information. And they're not then sharing it because they are, actively trying to be malicious and spread bad things, but because they are afraid or they are nervous or they are, curious. And this is the information that they've received that touches on some emotion that they have. I think that's a big thing about misinformation, is that it is often designed to strike an emotion. And that's, that takes root. And that's something that really strikes home with people, versus when, scientists talk from academia, it has a tendency to be very clinical and very harsh and very sterile. And I think that that obviously has its place and we need to be very clear in our communication. But I think we do need to be meeting people as humans and talking about, like, all right, what are you anxious about or scared about, or like, where do you have questions, and how can we have a conversation around that and talk with you about that science versus at you about that science. So I think that that role of empathy and listening is huge and really, really needed, especially right now. And we should have been doing it for decades, and we haven't always been good about that in science communication. But I think that there's a big push for that now, and I hope that we just continue to do better going forwards with that.
Thank you for touching on that. Um, I feel like in the simplest terms, I'm trying to imagine what what the world we live in would look like if, instead of people came in front of people and said, "Well, so here's what we know. We know A, B, C, D, E," versus if someone came to them and said, "Well, here's what we learned. We learned A, B, C, D, E," which implies we could relearn or we could continue learning. I feel like it's almost like just such a delicate framing. I don't want to call it an issue, but just a framing instead of saying I know, like here's what I learned, or um, I feel like that's one thing I wish I can. This is a random question. Are you on Clubhouse, or have you heard of Clubhouse recently?
I have heard of Clubhouse, but I am not currently on Clubhouse.
May I invite you to Clubhouse and like continue this kind of like weekly valve release sort of
Yeah.
conversation series, because I've been on this platform now for about a month, and it's been profound, just as a side note in this conversation, to be in real time conversations. Again, it's not video, so it's more intellectual and analytical, and as opposed to just pure emotional and sort of, again, visual triggering. um okay, so that's I just planted that seed. I'll fall
Yeah,
through on that later. Looking forward to that.
absolutely.
Damn, which also kind of got me off my flow here.
No, no, that's okay. I think the other thing that I think is important that sort of ties into that is the ability to say, I don't know.
Mm,
I think that it's one of the most, to me, one of the most important phrases in science is being able to say, I don't know, but here's how we're going to find out. Or I don't know, but we do know A, B, and C. We have learned these things. So we think it is likely to be this other thing, but we don't know. And here's how we're going to find it out. Because I think for me as a scientist, that is so reassuring when somebody is very clear about what they do and don't know and what their sort of certainty level is. But I think that a lot of misinformation comes from the point of, well, we know it's this, and we know it's this, and we know it's this. And I think to some people that sounds more reassuring that, like, well, they're confident. Whereas from a science perspective, it's like, no, 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 we would never want that level of confidence. We want to be very clear about what we do know, what we don't know, what we're trying to figure out, and the methods we're trying to use to do that. So that was actually one of the most reassuring things for me a couple weeks back was Dr. Fauci got up at some news conference and somebody said, what's the biggest difference with this administration? And I'm paraphrasing him here, but he essentially said, if we don't know something, we're not going to just make it up. And that to me is huge. That I think that that admission of just here's what we know and here's what we don't know, and here's how we're going to find out, here's what we're trying to do, is to me how we should be communicating and is so much more reassuring than just saying it's X or it's Y. And I was listening into a presentation last week that gave an example of this. It's apparently some famous psychology experiment that I'm going to mess up a little bit, that you have two employees and you're trying to locate a third. And you ask one employee and they say, aha, yes, I know that person. They're in building A. And you ask the second person and they say, well, I'm not sure, but I think they might be in building B. Turns out they're both wrong. The person you're looking for is actually in building C, but most people will continue to trust the second person you ask more, because they were clear about the fact that they weren't sure, versus the first person who essentially lied to you and said that they were positive, but they didn't know. And I've just been thinking about that so much over the past week, because I think it's something that we, again, sort of intrinsically feel as people, that, oh, well, this person was very clear to me about what they did and didn't know, but they answered me in good faith and I tried to figure it out. um, but we need to afford that to science as well, because that's what science is always trying to do, is to be clear about what it does and doesn't know. And yeah, we need to be better about teaching it that way versus just teaching it as science is facts that you must memorize and spit back out.
I really like hearing that example, because it also reminds me of um, Malcolm Gladwell's Talking with Strangers, and how he references, I don't know if you've heard that book or read that book. Unbelievable book.
Oh,
Actually, as an audio book, it's like this, it's almost like a 15-hour, incredibly produced stream of conscious podcast. It's
ooh,
incredible. So that's, yeah, absolutely listen to that.
I'll add that to
Or
my list.
read that. Yeah. But he references um this bias that we all have, I don't think he coined the term or anything, but he's referencing it as defaulting to truth. As listeners, we implicitly trust the confident person, right? Person number two in that example. Whereas person number one, and I relate to person number one where I'm like, well, I'm not so, I'm not so sure, which is another way of saying I don't really know. And sometimes I'll say I don't know, or sometimes I'll say I'm not so sure. But this concept of defaulting to truth, which has led to not only misunderstandings but wars and famines and the works. So given the fact that the last time we spoke, we were in question of, are we going to have a new administration? And now that we do have a new administration, like what are your feelings moving forward? Which also, I'm going to also include in this question, the fact that as an observer, I watched, I think last night, or perhaps 2 nights ago at most, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez talk about, or she does these spontaneous, sort of Instagram Q&A on like, hey, I forgot to mention before, like literally hours before the Capitol attack, I also received my second Pfizer shot. Do you have any questions? And so I watched this hours long stories series of her answering to her best, not so much to her best knowledge, but just from her personal experience, what her experience was like of receiving both shots, what the side effects were, if any, et cetera, et cetera. Like, how do you feel with this administration moving forward? And given whatever data we have accumulated up until this point of, I'm assuming 2 months of vaccinating people here in the States.
Yeah, I am cautiously optimistic is where I'm going to put things. So I think there have been a lot of really great signs now that the administration has turned over, that we're moving again towards an administration and a society that values science. So as I mentioned, Dr. Fauci has been given a speaking role again, and, has clearly signaled a shift in the priorities of the administration. For the first time ever, the president has elected a scientist to one of the close cabinet positions, and he appointed Eric Lander, who is a geneticist. So there is a little bit of genetics pride here that, one of the highest, I don't know how you would rank scientists in the country, but one of the highest political positions in the company and presidential advisors is now a scientist. I think that's huge, both for moving forwards and just signaling that this is a thing that this administration cares about. So I think that that's good. And I also think that, so I didn't see AOC's Instagram live on her second shot, but I did see her one on her first shot, because a lot of people sent it to me because she was trying to explain the science of it, and they said, how did she do? And I gave her an A-. There was one tiny little thing where I was like, oh, she got this minor detail wrong, but it's totally fine. But I think that more and more people who have a platform talking about the vaccine, talking about getting the vaccine and sharing their experience is super important, because first, it's safe. We have so many safety trials that have shown that it's safe. There are very low amounts of adverse side effects, but those are the things that often are what hit the news. Is, there were 5 people who got an allergic reaction, and that's a huge headline everywhere, versus the million minus 5 people who didn't have an allergic reaction. So I think the more people who are talking about their experiences is important from that angle, and also from the angle that we do know that people have, are more likely to have side effects from the second shot, which is kind of good. It means that the shot is working. It means that your immune system is mounting a response. But I think that we need to be very clear about that to people, so that they know what they're getting into and they aren't scared of going to get that second shot, that you might feel bad for a day, but it's not COVID. You cannot get COVID from this shot, and it is a sign of your immune system doing a good thing. So I think for all of those reasons, more and more people sharing their experience is good. And it's also, I am at the bottom of the priority list. I am young. I work from home. I'm healthy. I don't know when I'm going to get it. but so many of my friends are doctors or pharmacists or people who work in the healthcare industry, and they've all been sending me their like vaccine selfies, and it is so joyful and wonderful just to see these people that I care about who are doing this great work getting that. I mean, it makes me jealous because like I want it too. But I think that that is so reassuring that when you see someone in your life doing something, it is so much easier for you to consider yourself doing it too. So there is vaccine hesitancy out there. And I think, again, you know, some proportion of it is people who are anti-vax and who are very against it and all that. But I think there's a good portion of people who are hesitant because the information is coming from all these different places, and they're trying to sift through it and figure out, you know, what is correct information and what is incorrect information. And I just think that the more we can get positive experience with people out there, the better it's going to be. So from an administration standpoint and from just a personal standpoint, I am cautiously optimistic. And every day that goes by, I feel like I'm getting some new nugget of good news for, especially here in LA. For the first part of this year, there was not a lot of good news. But I think we're starting to be on an upswing again. And my dog woke me up at 4 a.m. this morning, and I like flipped on Twitter and I saw a tweet that was, you know, breaking news that there's preliminary data from the AstraZeneca vaccine trial that it might actually prevent transmission. And again, very preliminary data, but that is the kind of data we've been looking for months. And if that holds up, that is huge. That means that not only are you protected when you get a vaccine, but the people around you are going to be protected. And so that, like, I was so happy that I woke up and I found that news. Like, I think there are all these little pieces that are coming together that I still think this is going to be a bit of a long haul. Like, I don't see myself going on an international vacation anytime soon. But I can see sort of a light at the end of the tunnel, and I can see a horizon, and I think we all just got to hold out a little bit longer and it's going to be better. But I mean, I think too, like, there is still some big hurdles we got to get over. We got to actually get the vaccine to everybody. You know, the rollout has been very slow. The production has been kind of slow. Like, we need to figure out those logistics challenges, and those are outside of my expertise, but we're slowly getting there, and that feels good. And I think too, just the fact that, I mean, I could ramble for a whole hour about all of the technological innovations that had to come together at exactly this moment to make us ready to produce RNA vaccines. Because there, had this happened 5 years ago, we weren't ready, right? We needed innovations in the delivery and in the RNA molecule itself and in the technology and just like all of these things where we were so lucky and so perfectly poised that this technology was ready now. And so that too, I try not to take lightly the fact that it is decades of work that are all culminating in a year of a crazy sprint, but like there was a marathon before that sprint of so many scientists. And that makes me feel good too.
I mean, speaking of, thank you for saying that, because I, again, from that place of observing and being perplexed, how is it that we live in a society, we live in a world, I'll point it towards society, where we expect a new generation of fucking iPhones every year that outperforms the previous one, which was the best one ever. And we don't have the same acceptance to something like a Star Trekian vaccine that has, again, as you say, decades of research put into it. Obviously, there's thousands of scientists and virologists that are working together, thanks to technology, to deliver this within a year. I mean, why do we live in this stark contrast? Like, come on, people.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I don't know. I wish we were in that place because it it truly was a huge push. I mean, labs that were not working on this like turned to work on this. Like, it was this
Yeah.
huge collaborative push of people and of resources and of time. And all of that, but it was built on this foundation of so many decades
Yes.
and years of work towards this. But yeah, I mean, it's not, I heard again sort of a great metaphor for this from a podcast that I love called Sawbones, that was talking about the fact that it's as if you ordered a package, but you switched it from normal delivery to expedited delivery. You know, it's not that you expect that the thing inside the package is going to be broken because you changed the shipping method, but you just threw a lot more money and resources on it to get it there faster. And so I think that, yeah, it's sad that we had to have such a catastrophic thing happen to have all these resources turned to fight one problem, but it's also kind of amazing that, like, look what you can do if you take a huge amount of scientists and, you know, time and money and resources and put them to tackle a problem. I think it's not realistic to ask of every problem because there are so many that you can't have every scientist working on one thing all at once. Um, but I do think that the things that we have learned over the past year, once we have a moment to step back and breathe, I think that there are going to be a lot of things we've learned, both about RNA vaccines and translating them now to different diseases, including cancer. There's been a lot of research on using RNA vaccines against cancer, which I think I have to hope that the things we've learned this year are only going to expedite that further as well. But also about collaboration and about how can we, you know, scientists love to talk about collaboration, but we also are kind of competitive. And it's always like, well, whose lab is going to get there first? And I hope that there are some lessons learned from this year about how amazing, really, truly interagency and intercountry and intercompany collaborative research can be and how much we can get done with that. So, yeah, you can get a lot done when you have everybody working on one thing.
Yeah, well said. I mean, it's the more positive it's the more positive inquiry and reflection, immediate reflection of my my kind of almost cynical observation. But what's in that, I mean, hearing you say that reminds me of one of my favorite speakers and thinkers, Yuval Harari, who I don't know if you're familiar with his work. Yuval Noah
No.
Harari is his name, and he's a historian and author and professor in Israel, and he penned a number of three wildly successful books on, well, the first being about Homo sapiens, like how we got here.
Oh,
Second
is it
being
Sapiens?
Sapiens, yeah,
Oh, that
Sapiens,
has
yeah,
been on my to read list forever.
yeah. It's another one of those must reads, just from again, just to get what, tens of thousands of years of, or hundreds of thousands of years of background in like a 400-page book, which is yeah. I why am I bringing him up? Because as a speaker and like a public philosopher, he also speaks a lot about technology, and his most recent book is called 21 Lessons for the 21st Century, which is a great personal primer, or what the correct pronunciation is, to move forward with. I mean, also given my background in tech and how I'm sort of pivoting into this other side of it. But he states, or he will continually state in interviews and panel discussions, how the reason why we got here as mammals is that we have the ability to cooperate at scale based on fictions and also facts. The fact that we as mammals can collaborate across borders through means of technology and rapid communication is a testament to just to like where we've come from, how far we've come. And of course, there's also a shadow to that. I mean, the fact that we believe in fictions can also be to our detriment. But it's the fact that we collectively believed in stories and in myths that led to corporations and industry, like, right. He's saying like Toyota is not a thing. It's a story that people believe in. But there's also the matter and the material that exists, as a byproduct. Anyway, that just reminded me of that. Just that I mean, when we are allotted the time to reflect as a society on this time and really to be able to marvel at what was possible or what actually happened. As a parent, I feel like I also have to be a professional optimist, and look for that and generate that as an individual and as a co-parent. So I really appreciate hearing that.
No, I think touching on the idea of narrative is so central to this whole conversation, because I think that's one thing where misinformation gets so much power because it has a pretty striking narrative that a lot of these stories come from. Almost hate vocalizing this idea, but they come from this idea that, like, big pharma wants to make money and they're hurting you to do so. So these things are dangerous for you. And while not true, that is a compelling fiction. That is a compelling narrative to people. And I think that good science doesn't do a great job of crafting the alternative narrative because, again, I think that we, as scientists, saying, well, you have to tell a story sounds wrong. Like, no, I just want to give you my data. Like, I just want to tell you the numbers and be as clear as possible. But I think that people don't respond to that. And I think that there is an ethical and, useful way to create narratives around science that are sort of the opposite of, like, no, scientists are humans. They are concerned about you and their family and their friends. And, I think about scientists who do the two that really come to mind, because I think they touch on so many people, are things like cancer and neurodegenerative diseases. That so many of the scientists who go into those fields go into them because they've been touched by it in their own life, because they have somebody in their family who has suffered from one of these two things and they've watched it happen and they don't want it to happen to anybody else. And so I think that we need to do a better job of telling those stories that scientists are humans who care about you, who care about other people, and they're doing this work to help you. And I mean, my gosh, scientist salaries are so small. Nobody's doing it for the money. Like, I think, we need to be telling those stories. And I think it's totally appropriate to do that. And especially now where scientists are doing this work because they want to get back to normal life too. Like, scientists are trying to create a vaccine so that we can all get back to normal. Um, and I just don't think that as science broadly, we're great at telling those stories. We're getting better at telling the scientific stories of, this is a heart disease that's caused by this gene, so we're trying to tackle this thing. But I think we really need to add the human element back into it, because that's why so many of us do science, is because we're curious about the world, or we're trying to make a difference, or we're just trying to add knowledge or help the people around us. And I think for too long, we've thought of ourselves as like clinical data machines, and we need to just recognize again that we're all humans, and that's why we're doing this.
Yeah. I mean, it's like we can almost end on that, but as a good, like, it's a
Humanity.
good outro at humanity. But like, um, I, yeah, it's hard to kind of build in like moments of reflection in these conversations, because you almost like sometimes you feel like I want to touch on these points and I want to maximize time container and so on and so forth. And like, I and I almost have these intentional speed bumps, or I feel like this is that moment and I'm talking about it out loud. But given these last few minutes, so I want to be respectful of time, and because we could talk, for 800 years. Um, what is a good thought to end on, or a good inquiry. What about how do you see yourself this year? Either changing or altering or improving upon the methods with which you communicate or tell stories.
Yeah, I think the thing that I have been trying to think about a lot this year, spurred by the conversations I was having at the end of last year and how sort of that content was working, is just making sure I am doing my best job of talking with people rather than at people. And I think that's especially, on one hand, it's especially hard to do right now because I'm not seeing anybody in person. But I think that finding these spaces to talk with people about science and about what's going on and do it in an empathetic way is really important. I have spent so much of my sort of science communication career just talking about fun, interesting science and like things that sort of pop into my brain. And this is really the first time where I've talked about something that is happening currently and something that I think people are looking for information for actively versus, hey, maybe you might be interested in dog genetics or whatever thing, I'm making the next video on. I think I want to find more places to do things like this and to talk with people and to, yeah, just have more conversations versus just babbling science. Because I could babble science about stuff all day long, but I don't think that that is as valuable as touching on concerns and questions and doing so in a conversational way and in a way where, again, we're all trying to say, we don't know, we don't have all the answers right now. Science doesn't know what date we're all going to go back to work and school and exactly how the next vaccine that pops up is going to work. But I think I just want to do my best to try and talk with rather than at. That's my like post-it note for the year.
Well said, and I appreciate the self-reflection, the self-awareness that comes with that intention. Thank you so much again for the time, for the not knowing as much as the knowing, and for the cautious optimism. I really do think that that's whether you're a parent or not, that is I almost want to say the lane to be in right now. So thank you for mirroring that back to me as well. I look forward to another opportunity to do this, or even in Clubhouse. I'm going to send you an invite.
Yeah,
And
I'm excited.
And the best way for people to before they reach out to you personally to find the content that you create on TikTok, on YouTube, on Instagram. That's where I found you. Are there any other platforms or mediums?
I'm on, yeah, TikTok, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram are the big ones. And my name at all of those places is Alex Dainis, and that's Dainis. But yeah, I'm across all of those places, just trying to be as active in the comments and in the content creation as possible, which I don't know. I feel sometimes I'm better at like quickly responding to a comment than like making a whole video about something. But yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to be as present in those spaces as possible. And now also maybe Clubhouse. There's
Mm-hmm.
only one other Alex Dainis in the world. So assuming that he has not yet taken the name on Clubhouse, hopefully I'll be there under the same name too.
We're going to find out soon. Thank you for doing the work that you do, for the stories that you tell, for the way that you are communicating. And look forward to the next opportunity.
Same. I mean, thank you for having me too. I love these conversations. I get to approach what I'm doing from a very different angle, and I really appreciate that. These have been really great.
It's a privilege. Thank you so much. All right. Well, till next time.